Welcome to Chapter 5. Here we have 3 different parts we're going to cover. It's all going to be in one video though, but we're going to cover the idea of growing with consent. So what happens in longer term relationships. We're going to cover alcohol and drugs. And we're also going to have a look at contraceptives and ways to have safer sex. So your handout for this one has a bunch of different spots to put some thoughts as we cover them on each of those topics. So you might want to have that printed out, ready to go, so you can jot down some of your ideas. As usual, make sure that you have your question and terms log. So if you do have any additional questions or thoughts, you can note those and then ask a parent or teacher or other informed source of some of the answers to those questions as well. So starting off, we want to look at the idea of the model we've looked at so far around consent is the one we want to use every single time as a baseline, especially when it's a new partner or a partner we don't know very well, as well as anytime we're doing something new, even with a partner that we've maybe been with for a while. Those are really important moments to come all the way back to that sort of grassroots ground level, going through every single one of those steps. Now, some people often will say to me, well, is that feasible to do this in-depth level of communication and conversation every single time if you've been, together for 2-3 years with someone, or let's say married for 15? Like, where and how do we start to find a rhythm with someone we know well? And the answer to that is we can begin to shift once we've established how we communicate, what our partner is like, what are they comfortable with, what are we comfortable with. And when we really know those things and we've established a really strong sense of safety with a partner, we can look at the idea of growing with consent. So growing with consent, this is not stuff that you do right off the bat. This isn't someone you meet at a party and this is the way you go about things. This is only with safe, established, long-term reciprocal relationships. Remembering that even though we're going to talk about ways to evolve, we still have those same baselines. Anyone can always say no, even if you're married, even if you're in a long-term relationship. Consent can be withdrawn at any time still, regardless of how long you've been in any type of relationship. And every other single rule we've talked about so far still applies. We should still be looking for that ongoing feedback, even if we've been together with someone for a really, really long time. Okay, but some of the things that we can talk about is now the idea of what's called implied consent, which is a lot more focusing on nonverbal. So the reason we can do this as we grow with a partner is this is a much harder and individualized language to learn than our verbal words. We always want verbal and body language to match together, but as we grow, we have this option to really understand those subtle signs, right? You would be around a partner so often that when they make this little face, you know what they mean by that. You might not know what I meant by that, but my husband might, right? So there's a language you can learn between each other. And when you learn that really well, you can start to rely on that a little bit more. Coming back to every time, if you're not sure, or even a little bit unsure, you're going right back to that baseline model. You're asking, you're checking, all of those things. So the implied or nonverbal consent we can do because we've already done this early legwork with our partner. We've already learned and talked about, established these boundaries, established safety. We're all in that top level of the survival house. We're feeling safe and intimate in that zone. Now, another type of consent with more, again, adult or experienced relationships that some people will do, not everyone will do this, and it does take a lot of experience and upfront communication and comfort, is something called blanket consent. Now, this is when partners might agree up front what they're comfortable doing. It's sort of like an upfront way of saying, hey, if we're going to do this thing together, let's say, people are just going so far as making out. That's all they want to do together. But they say, hey, are we comfortable both doing X, Y, and Z while we're making out? Can we touch up here, not down here? So you kind of have this big conversation ahead of time. Everyone agrees ahead of time. And some people will also then use sometimes what's called a safe word. A safe word would be like, what is your way of telling me as a partner that whatever we're doing is uncomfortable, whatever we're doing needs to stop immediately. Some people will just simply say the word no is the word that they want to use. It's pretty straightforward, but some people might have a different way of communicating. They want to use the word pineapple, who knows? But that would be an agreed upon thing that partners would look at ahead of time. Still knowing that all of the same rules apply. You can always revoke consent at any time. If someone says stop, you stop, and you should still be watching for those body language signals. So we have that long-term relationship implied consent. We have the blanket consent, which is ahead of time. And then we have this idea that anytime we have any additional stressors or risk factors, we need to go all the way back to the beginning of that consent model with the hot spice and all of those communication aspects at any time. One of those things that adds risk in a relationship or in a sexual moment is, of course, the introduction of alcohol or drugs. So let's transition ourselves over to start thinking about what does that mean? Now, we do know the safest way to be sexually intimate with a partner is completely sober. No alcohol, no drugs, no additional anything that could influence our way that we see the world, other than just regular human experience together. We also know that for many people, this isn't realistic. Some people will choose to use alcohol and drugs at some point in their life. And if they choose to do so, we have to have a look at what that might mean for consent. And there's sort of 6 main points we want to talk about when we think at alcohol and drugs. The first idea is sort of the idea that anytime that you have new alcohol or drugs in a situation, if you're not sure how sober another person is, we're always going to err on the side of caution. If we've just met that person, for instance, at a party or midway through a night, we haven't seen their consumption, we're gonna tend to say, "Hey, listen, we just met. I don't know you or what's going on here, but I'd love to get you know further. Another time, what if we exchange contact information?" So we're always going to err on that side of caution if we're not sure. We're always going to it's more important with new partners or new activities. So if you are with a new partner or a new activity, again, trying to go back to the sober model is much better and safer. We have to understand that anytime we're introducing alcohol or drugs, the risk goes up. So with each drink or with each sort of substance, at every point that there's an increase, the risk is going up. Okay, so as risk goes up, we need to be even more cautious. We need to go slower. We need to use more verbal. We need to look for more cues physically. And remembering this whole time we're talking about this is there is a legal line of that consent that has to be considered. In chapter 2, I would have had you look this up. And what does that mean? In a basic way, it's sort of the same as drinking and driving. So whatever the legal amount is to have, for instance, of alcohol to be able to drive a vehicle, that would be the same general idea for legal consent with consumption of alcohol. So that's 1 standard drink per hour. That's a bottle of beer, a glass of wine, a little glass of wine, or a shot of some type of liquor or spirits, like a vodka kind of thing. So that's the general sense. If someone's had more than that, you're now entering into a bit of a danger zone. So knowing that is a real thing, you have to take informed choices about what you're going to choose to do around that. Right? So understanding as well that the stakes are high if we guess wrong. So because not everyone looks or acts the same when they're intoxicated with alcohol or another substance, we can't assume that we know. Well, they looked sober enough. It should have been fine. If someone comes back to you the next day and says, "Listen, I don't really remember what happened. That wasn't okay." That is unfortunately on us to make that choice around really understanding what level another person is at. The next one is the fact that when we are intoxicated, if we're intoxicated ourselves, we're not the greatest judges, actually. Our perception of another person in the world actually changes as well. So we might not be very good at judging how intoxicated another person is, or even how comfortable another person is. We might miss some of those signals that we talked about with the house of the second floor or that bottom floor, and that becomes really dangerous as well. So again, going back to, this is especially important around alcohol and drugs for new partners, or partners that we're doing something new with. The risk is really, really high, and it's really encouraged to wait until you're at a sober time for those activities, always erring on the side of caution. So looking at all 6 again, so we have that new partners, new activities, that's an even higher risk. We have erring on the side of caution if you're not sure how sober someone is, knowing that as risk goes up, even with partners that we know well, so risk being every drink or every substance level that's going up, we need to be even more cautious, slow, and verbal with a partner if we're choosing to take that risk. Remembering for number 4 that not everyone looks or acts the same when they're drunk, so don't assume that you can tell, especially with newer partners or people you don't know well. Remember the drinking and driving laws, so the standard drink per hour, that's your general sense of where that legal limit kind of is. And last but not least, we're remembering we're not the greatest judges when we ourselves are intoxicated. So that's sort of your big picture to think of. This isn't a completely black and white area. We do want to touch on it to get a sense of what might be coming in our lives to think about and how to make better choices and safer choices for ourselves and partners. I like to think of this idea as the same thing as maybe taking the time to put on a seatbelt when you're driving. Every time you ask for consent with a person, you go slow, you make sure you're doing all the steps we've talked about. It doesn't take a whole lot of extra time. And when you do it, if there is something that could be a problem, you're a lot more protected. And if you never have to use that seatbelt, oh well, you took 30 seconds to kind of put it on and take it off, and no one was hurt by doing that. And so why not? So all about that risk reduction around alcohol and drugs. So then the other things to think about when we're sort of introducing any type of sexual behavior, we, of course, thinking of on this topic of risks. One of those is around STIs. STIs stands for sexually transmitted infections, and obviously a risk of pregnancy. If there's sort of sperm and egg in the partners being involved, there's a risk that someone could be pregnant in that scenario. And if this isn't planned, and if this isn't something that you're wanting at this time in your life, you will want to think about ways to stay safer. So ways to stay safer, of course, involve contraceptives and different ways to reduce transmission of sort of body fluids and infections. So the first main category of this is barrier methods. So you got condoms, female, male condoms. There's both options. And then there's something else called a dental dam. So if you're doing oral sex, you can do that with a condom. That will work as well. But there's something called a dental dam for a female partner, or any partner actually. But if it's not a condom that works for whatever body part you're working with, the dental dam creates like a physical barrier. So it's just like a piece of latex that creates a physical barrier. So there's no risk of transmission of any of these infections that can be passed through these different liquids, essentially. The next type is what's called medication options. So these are getting vaccinated for certain things. So you've got your Hep B vaccinations. You've got your HPV vaccinations. There's a medication that's a pill format, I believe it's called PrEP. That one protects proactively against HIV. So there's a whole bunch of different sort of vaccination options. You can ask your doctor about which ones are appropriate for you, which ones have sort of the effectiveness that you're looking for as well. There's also hormonal methods. So what hormonal methods do is they essentially generally stop an egg from being released. So if there's no egg, then there can be no fertilization, and then there's no pregnancy. So that's everything from the birth control pill, the daily pill. There's a patch. There's a ring that goes into the vagina that releases the same hormones. There's a shot, an injection you can take. There's an implant. There's an IUD, which is a little device that gets inserted up into the uterus and sits there and sort of often has hormones it releases. Not always. You can get one without hormones too. But that one sort of sits there and mimics a pregnancy in your body so you don't keep having eggs being released. So lots of these different ways. Again, this is something you want to talk to your doctor about. This isn't sort of something to choose lightly. You want to make sure you're doing your research. What's going to work with your body, what's going to work with your medical history. And last but not least, there is an option also called the morning after pill. This is something that the partner who is sort of at risk of becoming pregnant would take within 72 hours after sort of an accidental. It's usually when like a condom breaks or something doesn't work. Someone forgot a pill or maybe threw up a pill or something is risky. They might take a morning after pill. Again, speak to your doctor or pharmacist about these options. It's often recommended to use sort of hormonal and barrier methods together. Barrier methods protect against STIs. Hormonal methods protect around pregnancy. Obviously, barrier methods are usually going to protect around pregnancy as well if you're using male or female condoms. Dental dam doesn't, though. That's just for usually oral sex. So together, if you use them, you're kind of upping your chances of safety, both sort of physically passing things along as well as blocking pregnancy. Again, reiterating, please talk to your doctor about this. I'm not a doctor. This isn't medical advice. This is just getting you a bit of a sort of snapshot of some of the options that are out there. The reason we're talking about your options with these things that are out there is because it becomes important around consent. So when you're going to be sexually intimate with a partner, you have the right to choose what contraceptive and protective measures you are comfortable with. You should never talk a partner into a method they aren't comfortable with. Like you can't force a partner to take the birth control pill if they don't want to, for instance, or it's not in their best interest for their health, their physical health. And if that's the case, if you and a partner don't agree on the type of contraception that you're going to be using, this is one of those moments that this might not be the right partner for you. You might have to walk away from that interaction because this is your safety and your physical body is kind of priority over anything else. And if you have a choice and you have a decision around what kind of safety you want for your body, and your partner doesn't agree, that's not a good sign. Or it might not be the right match. Okay. So also understanding with consent, if we agree to, let's say, sex with a condom with a partner, and suddenly that condom's not there anymore midway through the interaction, that's not informed a specific consent from Hot Spice. That's not okay. That interaction needs to be stopped immediately. Try to remove yourself from the situation, and you actually should go talk to someone and get some help because that's not actually okay. There's a slang term for this. It's called stealthing, and it is a crime. So if this happens, make sure you're getting support and help. Also consider as well getting potentially screened. If you have been sexually active before, or if your partner has, and you haven't had a regular screening, you can go to your doctor, you can get a checkup, and you can just make sure you have a clean bill of health before being intimate with a new partner. So that can be a really good idea as well. So different things to think about when you're making choices. It's not just about consent. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to do this, that, the other thing. And then all the stages we've talked around consent so far. It's also around thinking about your personal physical health and making sure you and your partner are on the same page with that, because that's really important. So that's kind of the main things for our chapter 5 here. Remembering you can fill out your worksheet for this one, all those different sections we just talked about. And from here, we're going to be moving on to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is going to look a little bit more deeply at sexual assault. It's a bit of a tougher chapter, and we're going to break it into a few parts to talk through it. There's some preventative stuff, though, so I don't want you to skip it. I do want you to think about if you do need extra support, or if you do need, make sure you have a helpline ready. If you need to take a break, take a break. But we're going to get into that stuff, and it's super important. So I will see you over there. Good job getting done chapter 5 now.